Hey guys, Kid here. You guys seem to enjoy me going over some of the spoiled cards, just my thoughts on them and everything. So I figured I'll do the follow up like I said I was going to be doing. I kind of already picked out the cards. These are just cards that were not available last week when I did the video, that they just came out during that time. So I figured I'd talk about them. So the first card here is Mana Flare Barrage. This is a really, like, we're starting to actually start seeing cards for Diana. I think this is kind of like her first real like other card we've seen outside of the starter deck for the most part that actually is like basically made for her. I really like this card. It's a really aggressive card that also is like a control tool into like wide boards that don't have a lot of health to like really survive a barrage like this. Obviously we want to maximize the damage for 3, but if you look at this, if you get the distant, that means this card itself will be doing at minimum 4 damage or adding 4 damage to the enemy life total. It is kind of overcosted, if you don't have the class bonus, but the assumption here is that you're always going to have the class bonus because this basically reads as it only works for Diana at this point, unless, other other champions end up using any of the Aether Wings or anything like that. But this card just seems really solid. It's obviously in fire for being a more aggressive and more damagey spell for the most part. So I'm really looking forward to see how Diana kind of shapes up to be in the end, because like we're now finally starting to see some cards spoiled for her. And with like the kind of idea I'm having in the deck for her, she's going to be a very she's not going to have a lot of allies to really work off of, because it seems like once again everything's kind of built around like cycling your spells and charging them into your staff to be able to swing with your staff for a huge amount of damage. And this card obviously lines up very well for that idea and everything like that. And it distills damage to all units, so it includes your own units other than your champion. So I can imagine that the Dan deck having very minimal allies, so like they don't really have to worry about this this effect basically wiping their own board. Next card here. So Asian, I hope I'm saying this right. Asian Riffle or Asian Riffle. So we're starting to see some more suited stuff, payoffs for suited. So this card just basically lets you go up a card as long as you hit 2 suited stuff. So you reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, banish up to 2 suited non-action cards revealed this way, and then put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. And then for as long as those cards are banished, you may activate them. So for the rest of the game, you can just... They're basically open cards that are in your hand, effectively. They'll be able to activate. So this card lets you pay 2 to hopefully go up a card in hand size, which is really good. Fire sometimes struggles with like keeping hand going because they're really fast at like discarding, setting up graveyard stuff and everything like that. But in some cases, it gets kind of awkward where you have to start sacking your own your own units to be able to draw extra cards, things like that. So this is a nice payoff for the whole suited gimmick that's going on right now in this set. And from what it looks like, there's even more suited stuff being released. It just seems like it's a deck that's going to be like self-contained in the sense that if you're playing one suited thing, you're probably all your stuff is going to be for the most part suited follower or suited allies and spells and things like that. So it'd be interesting to see how all the suited stuff ends up panning out, because it seems like it's going to be kind of like a very pushed type archetype thing going on here in this set. So I'm excited to see how it actually ends up, coming to be. And then here we have the Rogue Ace of Hearts. This is like another payoff card. The dream obviously is the 21, but I think realistically most games you'll be hitting him for the 6 or maybe 10. I think one thing to note here too is that it's a hard number you have to cap, and this card counts itself. So before you play her, you have to make sure you have 5 on the board. Because the way it's templated, as far as I'm aware, it has to be exactly 6. If it's not, then you're not going to get the bonus here. When we first looked at this card, it was kind of like, oh crap, they printed another Rococo. But the issue is, at the end of the day, getting these numbers might be really tough. But depending on how the deck pans out, like this actually might become a lot easier. Maybe 6 is pretty easy, but 10 and 21 are like the hard ones. Obviously, 21 is going to be the most insane one. I think if you pop off and hit the 21, you've probably won the game, because a lot of the cards look for the number 21. But outside of that, like this, between the 6 and the 10, those are probably the ones you're going to see the most often. I think ideally you always want to kind of hit the 10 essentially, because it's like a better payoff. Obviously, 21 being the best you hope for. Otherwise, this is just like another Rococo that you have as long as you hit the 6, and you don't have to worry about your hand size, which is nice. It'll be interesting to see how aggressively this card is going to turn out to be. It might not be that great at the end of the day. One thing to note is it's human and unique ally, so it does turn on red hair and things like that. Vengeful Paramor, I think that's how you say that word. On enter as a spell, if this is ephemeral, you can deal 2 damage to target champion that has ephemeral. The only reason I'm talking about this card is because, once again, this is another graveyard card that you can just pull out from the grave, like if you mill it or discard it through effects, and we know Fire has a lot of ways to discard hand, so you can still get value from this card. I like this card a lot, too, because it's pretty aggressive. If there's a turn that you're kind of off or have extra hand for whatever reason going into your Recollection phase, you can ephemerate, bring the card out, deal 2 damage, and then swing in for 2. It's just a nice follower or ally. I keep saying follower. I'm sorry, too much Shadowverse recently. But it's a nice ally that seems to be on the game plan for really good aggressive decks to get value. And then worst case scenario 2 is like you just slam this for 2 to swing in for 2. It gets removed, and later on you possibly pay for to bring it back to deal 4 essentially to your opponent. So it's a really good value card, and I love cards like this. Ephemerate as a mechanic seems very scary for me in this game. Just the fact that there's a lot of milling and discarding involved in this game. Aquafear, Essential, I don't know these names. I can't pronounce it. I can't read, guys. I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure I didn't talk about this last week in the last video, but this card is really, really interesting because it enters in hindered, but most of the time it's never going to come in hindered. Because it has the on-enter effect, you have 3 or more omens, you can wake up this guy, and then if you have 6 or more omens, it gets a buff counter. So this is another reason I feel like the whole omen mechanic in the deck might be pushed more towards a water type deck, because this guy is already statted very well. You're going to get the class bonus taunt because it's really huge. It's already statted as a paladin, essentially, the Snow Paladin or whatever her name is, which is already good. But on top of that, it could potentially gain a buff, becoming a 4/5. And still having taunt. It's pretty aggressive for 3 3 cost or whatever. This is a really great aggressive card that's also really defensive in a deck that's probably already going to be super defensive, in the sense that you're a guardian, you're going to have a lot of health that people have to chunk through and a lot of things to eat through. And if you're playing like some water ally stuff going on, it's going to be even harder, because there's actually a lot of good taunters in this set, which I'm kind of excited for in a sense, because ally combat in this game for me has always been kind of weird. I kind of don't like that allies just essentially have haste. They can attack immediately a lot of the times, which I think might in the long run, especially if there is no rotation or anything, in the long run, I mean, it might cause issues with them like designing ally effects and stuff. So I'm very curious in future sets how that's going to pan out, especially if they choose not to do a rotation in this game. But I think this is a really, really powerful ally that you should be aware of, and that, like, I think for the most part, if you're playing Water Omens, you're probably going to play some number of this guy, because it's just the stats, the effects, they're just all too good. Like, I don't see a reason not to do this. I think it's undercosted too for like the actual payoff you're getting. Obviously, it's not like the Paladin where you get a draw card, but it's nice that they can't really interact with this card in the sense of like they can ban. They're not able to like banish away your floating or whatever, because this only looks for omens to get the buff counter. So all they can really do is like negate the on enter effect if they really wanted to. Next, Froglet Footman. I'm sorry, it's kind of big here. For whatever reason, this image is way bigger. It's kind of getting cough. This is a 1 attack and 2 health on this guy. I think this is a pretty solid card overall due to its effect. And the typing on this card is insane for the effect. So it's a 3 cost, 1/2. But what makes it so good, in my opinion, is the first static effect, which is if damage would be dealt to Froglet Footman while it has a buff counter on it, prevent 1 of that damage, which is good. And it has its own on-enter effect where you can banish floating memory from your graveyard if you do put a buff counter on it. So this is a 2/3 that is essentially a 2/4, because they'll have to do 4 damage in one go to actually remove this. But the reason I think it's worth talking about this card at all, which is kind of the insane part for the card, is that it has the animal trait on here, and there are no class bonuses. So this isn't class bonus locked or anything, any of these effects, which means in Tamer, like Genbu and stuff like that, they can, on the turns where they do Seaside Ringleader, This can come in with 2 buff counters, basically becoming a 3/4 or effectively a 3/5 due to the prevent 1 on that. Obviously, this doesn't have taunt or anything, so people can't can kind of ignore it and attack through you essentially. But what's scary about this card is that once it becomes a 3/5, it's going to need to be answered, because swinging in with this for 3 every turn, not only are you going to be able to pick off any allies on the board that are just like straggling behind and take control that way, because even if they retaliate back, they still you can prevent 1 damage. So anyone that has 1 attack is just basically a 0 for you, this guy. Because it's so annoying to remove this body, or it has some protection, it itself, it can become a threat over time very, very quickly. If you've played in the recent meta, Frostborn Paladins with all the water stuff going on, those especially in Daochan decks have been like threats on their own, where like getting 1 to 2 out is more than enough to take control of a game, especially in like the mirror match or something like that, where it requires people to answer it immediately, because it's just a threat that's just hard to remove, and it's dealing 3 damage a turn. We don't have a lot of health in this game or life in totals in this game at all. You can't like overheal essentially. So you're either forced to play healing or forced to play some kind of way to block damage. And this kind of like puts your opponent like in that pressure. You get them in the chokehold here with this guy and with their little froglet footman, and just start swinging in and kind of hopefully take control of the game that way. I think this card is a pretty powerful card for an uncommon. I think you should pick up 4 of these. Just have them. Make sure to have them at some point, because I do think it's a powerful card that could potentially see a lot of play, especially in tamer decks. The fact that it has the animal trait is like gas, basically. Expedious opening. This card is just interesting. I just want to talk about it. I'm not familiar with every card in this game just yet, especially when it comes to allies. It's kind of like I only know what happened in the last meta or so. So that's all I'm really aware of. But I think it's good to keep this in mind to kind of figure out like what are like on-enter effects that we think are broken, that if we could play at fast speed would be like insane. This essentially lets you do that without going down a card. Of course, it'll basically you pay 2 extra to go ahead and create that fast speed onto whatever ally you're going to be playing. But just be aware that like if they're playing wind, and you should be like this is a card you want to mess around with. We need to look at cards that have really insane on-enter effects to like really bust the game. Like I can't even think of anything in particular off the top of my head right now. It's just nothing I didn't really think about or even look through the card list just yet. But I think this card has potential to be obnoxious, especially down the line too. This is a card that just will only get better as the game develops more and more cards get released, because at some point they're going to forget this card exists. They're going to print an on-air effect that's insane, and then suddenly wind whatever playing this is just going to have something really broken, and it's going to get banned eventually. But it's something to keep in mind. Like I said, just fast activation on a card that normally shouldn't have it. There's a lot of broken things that could potentially come of it, not necessarily in this set or prior sets, but it's something this card will have value at some point. So you just honestly, it's probably worth picking up 4 of these early on, in my opinion, just to hold on to them. But yeah, fast activation is broken on cards that shouldn't have it. So keep this in mind when looking at the future cards. Favorable Omens is another card that I'm like, I look at this card, I'm like, oh my god, it's just like if there's a Wind Omen deck being played, it's going to be really, really hard to actually remove their board. Just with cards like this, just like say like protect 3 allies on the board, and then suddenly you're just like, well, I lose the game because I can't remove anything off the board because they have like 3 wind element omens in banishment, and suddenly the entire board gets +3. I wasn't like doing the math around that, and suddenly you just lose the game. This is such a great like fake fog effect, I guess, way to describe it. If you're not familiar with the terminology fog, it's a term from Magic where you basically block damage or basically negate their attack. This kind of does the same thing in a sense, because it just wastes an attack or waste their turn because maybe they were setting up to like blow up the board. For example, in Arisana, now in those matchups, they're going to have to make sure to have like an obnoxious amount of counters on their Polaris, like 7 or so, to make sure the board is actually cleared, because a Favorable Omens comes out and like everything gets like +3 or +4. It's going to be like doomsday for Arisana, for example. I think this is a really powerful card in like obviously ally focused decks and wind if you're playing Seal. So yeah, this is a card to look out for, and it's a common, which is nice, which means it's going to be really easy to get a hold of like a playset if needed. Poisonous Breeze Cap. So this is a cleric item. If Poisonous Breeze Cap would be suppressed, you may sacrifice it instead. If you do, each opponent banishes a card at random from their memory, and then has on and draw a card into your memory. So this is, I don't like this card at all for a few reasons. One, I feel like it's really powerful that it cycles itself essentially. Like obviously, this card alone isn't going to be that scary or broken. Essentially, it might end up being pretty good in some specific decks that already play like really good like wind allies. For example, Baby Green is always like a card that's really good. You can suppress this away, and then now you make them banish a card at random, which means they go down a card. You technically go down a card on board, but not really because this cycled itself for whatever reason. Because you get to draw a card into memory. But the reason I do not like this card, or I think this is a card that is scary and like going to be unfun for players, is at the end of the day, I think when it comes to discarding cards from people's hands and memories and stuff like that, things at random never feel good no matter what. Like, I think as a card game player and like competitive player, you don't want too much randomness in your game. I think there are times when randomness is a lot of fun. And like, for example, like even in Hearthstone, like the randomness in Hearthstone sometimes is pretty fun. Like, what's the mechanic? I forget the name of the mechanic, but it's Discover. That's the mechanic where you like find random cards and stuff like that. I think that's a lot of fun because you can't always play around stuff like that. But this is going to be really annoying. Like one, I think it's going to make players sad because losing cards at random kind of sucks. You have no agency on that. Like maybe you have a 7 cards in memory and they hit the 1 dungeon guide and you're like, really? Like it's going to suck a lot and it's going to feel really, really bad. The fact that this cycles itself too means they're not if you're playing it, you're losing some tempo by having to play this out. But with the way a lot of wind decks do run, they get critical mass cards into their hand a lot, like fairly quickly and very like consistently. I feel like it's not too uncommon to see a wind player sitting there with like 10 cards in hand, depending on how the game state is going, which means that yes, there is some tempo loss playing this card sometimes, depending on what state in the game you are at. But at the same time, you're not really going down any cards. You just lose like 1 activation that turn. You might have been able to play like 2 allies instead you only play 1. But this cycles a card, and then you can potentially like ruin your opponent's game plan, especially if your opponent does weird things like they're going to try to go up to level 2. They only put 2 cards down in their memory because that's all they can really play that turn, and they were planning to banish both of those to go up to level 2. Suddenly, Poisonous Breeze Cap happens, and then they can't level up. But yeah, I don't know. This is a card where I think it's really scary, and also to be on the lookout for. I think it's going to be. This is the type of card it's either going to be really, really good or just not really do anything. So I'm interested to see how it ends up playing out. Like I said, I do not like random discard. I think it's like one of the worst feelings in a game because I played another game called Shadowverse Evolve that involved a lot of random discards, and that was a very obnoxious. Whenever that was like a meta deck in Abyss, that deck was really obnoxious to play with. Sometimes they just like. Yeah, they snipe the 1 card in your hand, your 5 cards in hand. They hit the one that like literally wins you the game, and you're like, "Well, I lose now," like because they just randomly like sniped a card from my hand, which I'm not a big fan of. I don't know about you guys. Let me know in the comments below. But random discard, I hate it. Purging Tempest. This was another interesting card because I think this is kind of the first time they've printed this effect. It's like an anti-mill card, essentially. So until the end of your turn, if 1 or more cards would enter target player's graveyard from anywhere except the field, banish them instead. So that even means, from my understanding, I could be completely wrong, but things on the stack will not even go into graveyard because it doesn't go from the field to the graveyard. It goes from whatever that's resolution zone is into the graveyard. So my understanding is that stuff will get banned as well, or banished as well. If I'm wrong about this, let me know in the comments just to correct me because I don't want to misplay when I'm trying this card out. So what's interesting about this card is people can play Lost in Thought, things like that. In response, you can Purging Tempest, and suddenly they lose their Lost in Thought. They thought they were going to get into the grave, things like that. It'll be interesting to see how this card plays out. I don't know how good it's going to be, but it's a card to consider, especially if some kind of graveyard strategy becomes really, really powerful, like kind of like what Genbu does or something like that, where people are, or even like people who crack the penguin fractal to mill themselves. In response, you play this, and they're kind of just like mill themselves, banish 15 cards from their deck, essentially, stuff like that. I guess kind of obnoxious, essentially. I'm wondering if they're printing cards like this because they're worried about graveyard strategies becoming too powerful. I personally think a lot of graveyard strategies are going to become even stronger because of this set. So I guess maybe they're trying to get ahead of it with a card like this. So yeah, card worth looking at for sure. Aether Cloak Sentinel. This is an Astra 2-cost 1/4 Guardian Ranger human. So ranged 4, which is like really good. If we're playing the Ranger class, we want some payoffs for having to do become distance or whatever. Spell Shroud and Taunt making this card really, really hard to remove. They're going to have to swing into it a lot, and it's good protection. Anything with Taunt is really annoying for your opponent to deal with, so suddenly they can't start swinging in. But the big thing about this is on enter, you may load an Aether Charge card from your graveyard or hand into the Aether Wing weapon you control. If a card was loaded from your hand this way, draw a card. So this card lets you cycle a card out of your hand that you might not need and have no real use to like really play, but you won't get extra damage in your swing. I like that about this card. I like how hard it is for this card to actually be removed. The range 4 making it a 5/4 when you can swing in it is going to have huge swings in the late game once you hit level 3. I like the fact that it's a 2-cost, meaning that a lot of the times once you get to your level 3, like for example Diana, because I assume this is going to be played mostly in Diana if it's played at all, there are times where your hand size is not that great, and so having a high value target like this only costs 2 that has like a good payoff feels really good, and it will protect you, so it'll hopefully provide you an extra turn or 2 before you have to start swinging in with your staff again. But yeah, I think this is a really solid ally to consider if you're going to level 3 Diana. It just seems like a good ally overall. Baleful Oblation. God, I am so bad at reading these cards. So this is a 5-cost, but it's actually going to cost you 3 because it's basically a seal only card. You deal X damage to all units except for your champion, where X is the lowest reserve cost among your omens. This is really interesting because this is once again another board wipe that also hits your opponent's champion. So you could get multiple of these in hand. Maybe you only banished, like the lowest cost you've banished is like 5. And that's a lot of damage that's going to go through. It's going to clear the board, so you can take control of the board, having a board wipe that way. On top of the fact that it's going to clear the way for Seal to be able to swing in on the turn this pops off, and on top of that, it deals damage to your opponent, so you can help close out the game a little bit more. This is a really, really solid card. I think it's going to have a very interesting strategy for this card, and depending on the deck, because obviously the idea is that you want to have like all the stuff you banish away as an omen to be a very high costed card. I think ideally you want this to deal like 4 damage. So like the lowest cost card you want to do is like 4. But there are cards that are like that essentially cost 2 or less sometimes that just banish themselves as an omen. So to like accelerate your omen game plan. So it'll be interesting to see if like this card can even mesh with those cards very well. But this is a strategy I think that Seal should be looking at day one. How do I abuse this card? Because I think Seal is one of those champions that's going to be like one of those inevitability champions where like every turn you're dealing so much damage slowly until like you just lock your opponent out of the game because they can't heal and get through your champion's effects essentially at level 3. So I'm excited to see how this card and what strategies appear for it, or if maybe it's not good enough. Maybe people will end up preferring the accelerated game plan of getting more omens in faster so they can start swinging in with more damage and getting the draw when they have 5 or more omens in banishment. Mary Ann Maladroit, right? Maid, whatever. This is another card that's as far as I'm aware, this is the first time they printed an effect like this in this game, which these are the type of things I like. Mary Ann has Vigor as long as you have one of your omens has Vigor, and then the same is true for the rest. So this can become a very aggressively, need to be answered ally as soon as it drops. Mostly, obviously, it's going to be played in the Seal deck. And then like for every omen that has a different reserve cost, it'll get +1. So I assume this is usually going to be like around a 4/4 possibly, maybe a 5/4 when it does come out. And a lot of times, I think we're just looking at things giving this ally effects that are really really powerful, like for example stealth, making it harder to remove. Same thing with spell shroud. I don't know if we want to put taunt on this or anything like that. Vigor, obviously a good one. Intercept could be a good one as well. Ambush is all right as well. Like all these keywords are very good keywords. So depending on how this card gets developed in certain strategies with banishing certain like cards with these effects, or maybe there's just like one card you can play that has like 5 of these effects. You just dump it and just banish it away. It doesn't even have to be in your element. You just need to be able to get it to the graveyard. So people who are playing fire decks, for example, then maybe they'll be able to play some big guy that normally doesn't get played at all, but because it's in the grave, they can banish it to the as an omen, and suddenly this card gets like 5 keywords, and this card becomes insane. So yeah, this is another card I think worth looking at and considering, depending on if you need allies in the top end. Though I don't know how this meta is going to shake out. Like I said, I think like I want the game to be a lot more about level 3s mostly, but sometimes I'm scared that we're going to go back to this meta again, where we're sitting on spirits and level 1s. But this gives me hope for them pushing more good level 3 cards like this. Nightmare Coil, I just saw this when I was getting these cards together, so I haven't actually read this card before. So it's a 2-cost fast spell. Activate this card only if your champion is distant and only during your recollection phase. And then class bonus Ranger, so obviously this is going to be for Diana. This card's activation can't be negated. So the fact that it can't be negated is insane, because the effect it has is insane too. So you draw a card until the end of turn. Whenever an opponent activates a card or ability, that opponent's champion deals 8 unpreventable damage to itself. So the turn you're trying to go for game, or make sure that they can't really interact with your board or anything like that, you play this out. It can't be negated. You're going to cycle a card, so you don't lose a card when you play this during your recollection phase. And there's a lot of cards. I don't know how many there are, but there are a few cards that will give distant to your champion from the grave. So you could just pay to, I forgot what the card name is. It's a blue card. You could banish it from the grave to give it distant, and then you can play this too. So you need like 4, be able to pay for 4 reserve during that turn. But this almost guarantees that you're like safe essentially to like win the game. Like this card is like a better anti counter card, I feel like, than the Scepter. The Scepter is very cute though, that we talked about last week or the last video, not being able to negate next card activation. This kind of does the same thing, except they can't interact with this, unlike they can interact with the wand itself. But the one cute thing about the wand is that you can like put it on a QSG and then bring it out at the end of their turn, because it comes in hindered, and then stand, and they didn't expect it or anything like that. But yeah, this is a really really powerful card. I think it's probably going to see play for sure, because if you're going for the kill turn with Diana, like being like, hey, if you do anything this turn, you're just going to take 8. Like, go ahead and try to counter my swing or whatever. You're just going to lose. So, yeah, very interesting card. I think it's worth experimenting with for sure. The fact that this card activation can't be negated to is insane. So we'll see how this card plays out in the end. Profane Bindings is another Umbra card. 2 cost, negate target card activation, banish this card. Banish the card that had its activation negate this way. Put Profane Bindings on the bottom of your champion's lineage, and then inherit effect -5 to champion itself. So you're essentially playing this in Umbra as a negate spell that you're able to just do immediately at the cost of 5 of your max health. This card to me, I think, is probably not that great, because it just really depends if this might be a really insane sideboard card, for example, because maybe we're still on some kind of meta where people are playing Burst Asunder and they're like doing 10 plus damage to you. Having this card like be able to like pay 5 of your life essentially and negate their win con probably is fine if the meta is about big burst damage or big burst swings or something like that from spells, for example. But if it's not, this card is very, very bad. You're taking 5 life. You're trading 5 of your life to negate a card that ideally should win your opponent the game. But I feel like depending on the meta evolves, if we're playing against a bunch of allies and stuff like this card is just going to be dog water. I think this is more of, you should consider this card if the meta evolves into we do one big swing of huge damage, So the way I stop that is by sacrificing 5 of my life to negate it. I do know I believe there are ways to remove curses from your lineage. So it's going to be very interesting to see if those curse cards become more valuable because this card exists. Because as far as I'm aware, this is like one of the better curses that you would be putting on yourself. Like the payoff for it is pretty huge in my opinion. But let me know in the comments below what I'm missing on curses, because I did not play during when Diana was out or anything. Like I said, I started playing basically this last set. HVN was like my main hardcore grind set. Nefarious Timepiece. I thought this card was very interesting too, because you enter the field, you choose a regular card name, and then it costs 1 more. So you can do funny things like QSG. If you can name QSG on this, and suddenly they have to pay 1 to be able to like even bring it out. I thought that was kind of funny. And the fact that you can pay 5 and draw a card in your memory, this is essentially like another backup charger effect. So there's chances where this card will be C play, just because getting extra draws while also slowing down maybe your opponent's Regalia deck in some way during the materialization phase, make something cost more. It will be very interesting. And at any point, like for example, in control decks, I think control decks for the most part of the decks that will probably get the most abuse out of this, because 1, it can slow down your opponent a bit, and control decks are the decks archetype that will hold their hand up a lot of the time. And then if they don't have any reaction, if your opponent doesn't present anything that you have to react to, they essentially skip their own turn doing nothing. So this is like kind of a payoff for like, well, you made me skip my turn. This has been out for a few turns. I have 6 cards in hand. Might as well get the draw now off of this card. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this ends up being played. Like I said, I think this is more obviously control archetype type-ish cycle effect that you might see in the future. So yeah, if you're playing control, I consider this card if you think there are good regalia to like be naming that make him cost 1 more. Safeguard Paragon. This is another interesting card. In a way, I almost feel like it's a better Clarent. Kind of does what Clarent was trying to do. So the big thing about this card is it's essentially you pay 3 for 1/2, and then you can sack it to prevent the next 4 non-combat damage that would be dealt to each unit you control this turn. What's interesting about this is that depending on how you interact with your opponent, like at any time, if your opponent like swings into this card because they need to remove it, instead of just letting it get removed, you can sack it, get the effect, and then protects your board essentially for the turn, which is really annoying. I think this card's going to be quite annoying, especially against decks that don't really have ally-based boards, and they try to abuse things to clear the board that basically do spell damage, non-combat damage. This card is going to be obnoxious, and I don't think we're gonna. I think ally decks are going to be very happy this card exists, and as a person who doesn't really play very heavy ally decks, I'm going to be very annoyed a lot of the time. All right, this is the final card we're talking about. This is another suited payoff. I don't know how crazy this card's going to be, whether it's going to be good or not. But it's a 0-cost unique Fantasia. Has cardistry 10, which sounds insane, but possibly depending on how these games play out with the suited mechanics and stuff like that, I can see this going down to like 5 or less to draw a card every time, which means that they can during your opponent's turn. If this ever gets to 0, you're just like you're on gravy train. You've probably already won the game. I don't see a way this is going to cost 0 for its activated effect. But this is a cute payoff for playing more suited stuff. Oh, I thought this. Okay, I misread this card. Actually, maybe this card is actually Booty Cheeks, but it is a suited card, so I think it counts towards suited objects with different reserve costs, so that might matter here. But the big thing here, I thought this could be only activated once per turn, but it activates this ability only once, period. So I assume it's once per game, essentially. So this card, not as good as I thought it was going to be, potentially. But I guess it's worth looking at, because 1, it's another suited object you can have on the board with a different reserve cost to help the cardistry effects become cheaper, which I think is the main payoff. Like, you essentially playing the suited deck is kind of like you're trying to play a snowball deck, essentially, where your allies have good effects. As long as you have more and more stuff on the board, they cost cheaper and cheaper. And the ideally is that you want all these cardistry effects that cost relatively nothing for you to activate their effects. So I guess this will help towards those effects. But when I first read this card, I thought it said once per turn, but apparently I can't read. So this card is a lot worse than I thought it was. Maybe it's going to be busted though in the whole suited archetype. We'll see. Anyway, that's all I have for what has been spoiled so far. We're about a week, a little bit over a week away from the release of the set. I'm really excited for it. I might upload some box opening videos. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments. I don't normally do box opening videos because I don't really get that excited when I open cards. But also, I've never opened a CSR, and I opened 6 cases of HVN, and I opened 0 CSRs since I've played this game. And I'm kind of sad. And every time I open product in this game, I get really sad that I haven't opened a CSR yet. So hopefully in the next set, I do open a CSR. So maybe I should record it and put it on camera so I can pop off if I do get one. And it'll be one I don't like for sure. But yeah, let me know in the comments below if you want to, box opening videos or anything like that. One of the things too is I think I'm going to start trying to record my locals here in Las Vegas. Just record a couple matches every week whenever I go to locals, and hopefully upload with some commentary and possibly get some of the players on from the locals to talk about why they made certain plays or like the decks and stuff like that. I think that'll be fun. I don't see a lot of that type of content being pushed too often for this game. So I hope I can fulfill that niche for people who like to watch gameplay videos, and especially with commentary discussing the game and strategy essentially. But yeah, besides that, hope to see you guys in the next video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It keeps me motivated to keep going in this game. Other than that, guys, I'll see you later. Peace.